Today, we're sitting with Barbara Herbel Hendricks, a longtime member of Hope United Methodist Church, and she's going to tell us about some of the people she's encountered here and some of the things she's done and some of her memories of this church. Barb, thank you.
You're welcome.
Tell me how you first heard about this church.
Well, 40 years ago, Chuck, my late husband, and I were expecting our first child and felt very called to find a church home. I was born and raised Methodist. He was born and raised Missouri Synod Lutheran. After a long discussion, we came to the conclusion he had to come my way because I couldn't go his way, or we had to find a compromise in the middle. And we live less than 2 miles from here, so we thought we'll just go see what that Methodist church on the corner is like, and the rest, they say, is 40 years later.
And Chuck was in the Air Force at that time?
Yes.
And you lived in this neighborhood?
We still do. I still do.
In the same place?
Yep, same house. Yep.
Did anybody you know invite you to here? Or you
Nope.
just knew the
We
church?
just walked in cold turkey one morning, worshiping in Fellowship Hall, because the new edition wasn't on, with Al Brown as the pastor. And that was in probably November of 1982. We'd actually just moved to the neighborhood. And then we actually joined the church in January of 1983.
Our record showed January 13th.
Well, I knew it was January of 1983.
1983. And you were pregnant with your
Yes,
first daughter?
yes. She
What was
was
it?
born in March of that year.
Tell us what it was like to worship in what was essentially a one-room church.
It was always fun. Every Sunday morning you had to come in and set chairs up because there wasn't a place then to have coffee and donuts afterwards unless you took all the chairs down. There was, it's kind of like worshiping in the sanctuary. Everybody had their assigned spot, so to speak, where they would sit, and if those chairs weren't put up, they'd put chairs up because this is where I sit.
That's right.
So, yeah.
And then if we had a meal, you had to take them down and
Yep.
put out chairs and tables and
Yeah, it was a lot of always moving things around.
Yeah. You mentioned Al Brown. He was the pastor at that time, and also Victor Schultz.
Right, and
You
Victor
remember-
paid
yeah.
a visit to us. I think we'd come 2 Sundays, and the next week Victor came and visited us at home, dropped in unannounced, and to see if there was anything we needed or whatever. And we were kind of low key the first year because we had a new baby and we were learning what it was like to be a parent.
You had your hands full.
Yeah. And then as she started to grow, we started to get a little more involved. So,
And tell us a little bit about what you remember about Al Brown.
you know, it's been so long ago, I don't honestly remember a lot about Al. I know he was a big guy. And I do know that when he and his wife, I think Al was on hospice at the time, but I know there was a drive here at the church then to take food in to where they were living over off of Monaco. And so, of course, I was on that team to take food in. So I always found the church to be a very warm, welcoming place. And a lot of the people that I still am friends with are still here.
Yes. After Al Brown, Dr. Vickery came. Do you remember him?
Yes, yes. What I remember about Dick Vickery is probably my favorite memory is, well, during the time he was here, I was organizing Vacation Bible School because I had 2 little girls at that point. And we were doing Marketplace 29 AD, which would, and it was out on the lawn, where now the playground is, but out there under tents, and we had set up like a marketplace that would have been in Jerusalem. And Reverend Vickery came to me and said, I want to be involved in one of the booths. And I said, well, here's what is going to be available on the street. What would you like to do? He said, I'll make bricks with the kids. And he was out stomping in the mud and the straw, making adobe bricks with the kids during the course of Bible school.
I didn't notice him because I thought he was a little stiff and not
He-
impersonal.
He was the only pastor during the time that I was involved in Bible school that actually approached me and said, what can I do as the pastor to be visible and involved with the kids? And I didn't assign him that task. He picked that task.
To actually get his hands and feet dirty.
Feet dirty, yeah. Because the kids all went home with a little adobe brick they'd made, you know.
Did you know Lois Schubert?
I remember, well, she was, yeah, because she was in charge of Christian Ed, and I was chair of Christian Ed. We interfaced. Again, that's enough years ago that's a foggy memory.
After Dr. Vickery, Sam Day was the pastor here.
The good news.
Tell us what else you remember about him.
Well, I was telling Bob this morning, the funniest thing I remember about him is during the time he was here, we would always, as a church, go Christmas caroling. And one Sunday afternoon, and he and Barbara and a whole bunch of us went to one of the assisted living, it wasn't called assisted living back then, but assisted living areas that had what I call a secure wing. And so when we went in to sing, they had locked the door behind us because they didn't want any of the residents wandering. And as we're leaving, Sam put his hand out and shoved Chuck back into the room and closed the door, and he said, we'll just leave you here. And of course, Katie was beside herself. I want my daddy.
I can imagine.
That's what I remember about him, besides the good news. And always the fact you knew his sermon was going to have 3 points. Always 3 points.
And when he finished, he would stop.
Mm-hmm.
He'd say what he wanted to say, and then he'd...
And the good news is the end. Yeah.
Well, Margaret Hankins was our first female senior pastor. Did you have any qualms about having a female pastor?
No. Nope. And Margaret was very instrumental in assisting a group of women who said, wait a minute, there's a men's Bible study that meets and they're not letting the women come, and we want to have a Bible study before we all go to work. And she told us if we could get 10 women who would commit to come, she would lead it. So, and then the group was actually about 22 at one time, and then it has dropped away to where there's just 3 of us, and we don't meet regularly now, but we still are there for each other. So.
But to start, you would meet early in the morning?
Yeah, we'd meet upstairs in the library at 6 a.m. And take turns bringing in, muffins or bagels or whatever. And we'd meet from 6 until about 7:15, and then we'd all go to work. So.
Well, Margaret was a co-pastor for a couple of years with John Lee.
Yeah.
You remember him?
We used to call it the tag team. We kind of thought they were going to slap each other's hands, but yeah, that was that. I thought it worked really well. A lot of people I know weren't quite as good, weren't quite as pleased with it, but we thought it worked well.
I agree with you, and I think they made it work.
Yes.
Their personalities were such that one of them didn't have to be the big dog or in charge.
And their personalities, while they were very different, they melded together so well that it made a really well-rounded pastoral team.
And Margaret was here for several years, and the second part of her ministry was with Steve Miller. You remember Steve?
Oh yeah, Steve officiated Chuck's funeral. So
we did.
Yeah, and Steve told me during that time, Steve and Lissa had a daughter that was Emily's age. And Emily had written a letter to her daddy to have read at the funeral. And Steve said, I don't know if I can read this because it hits too close to home. So
Steve was very helpful with Sharon when her sister passed away. In fact, within half an hour after she died, and she died at home, Steve was there.
Yeah.
And he was very comforting.
Yeah, and he showed up too.
So that was quite a shock. I always remembered Chuck as a young, vibrant man.
He was 49.
And he goes out for a run, and
as he did most days of the week.
that most of us think is enhancing your health,
Mhm.
and he didn't return.
And what it proved to me is that when God says your time is up, your time is up. So live your life the best you can because you don't know about tomorrow.
Amen. Dale Beck was here for a year or so. You
Yeah,
remember Dale
yeah,
Beck?
he was the interim pastor. What I remember most about him is his home in Estes Park was caught in that fire.
That's right.
And most of the time, people in our big sanctuary would spread all out. But that Sunday after his fire, we all sat right around him, and he was blown away that people had rallied around him, so to speak.
Yes. Well, let me back up a little bit about some of the other associate pastors or special mission pastors that we had here. Do you remember Marilyn Lesser?
Mm-hmm. And her daughter. Marilyn had asked me for one of the women's retreat if her daughter, I think it was Cheryl Lesser, could be my roommate. Like, yeah, so Marilyn and I, again, she was Christian Ed, and I spent too many years as chair of Christian
Involved with
Ed,
it.
but that's all right. That was my passion. So, yeah, I remember Marilyn. And then with Deborah actually officiated when Ed and I were married because we were right in the middle of a transition for lead pastor.
Yeah. And you're talking about Deborah Juarez.
Yeah, and I didn't want someone who I didn't feel knew me and knew our, because Ed had been widowed and I'd been widowed, and we didn't want someone who didn't know our story to officiate. Maybe that sounds strange, but to us we wanted someone who knew the journey we'd had and felt lucky to have found a second go round. So.
And Deborah was the youth pastor when
Right.
your girls were teenagers.
Right.
And she's been involved with them here at the church.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Went on mission trips with Deborah. The kids did.
Before we started this interview, you mentioned Richard Lyon.
Yeah, and he's back up there with Sam Day.
Yes.
And Richard was super instrumental in getting the fantastic flannel board collection that we have. I think there are about 160 Bible stories told in flannel board. Not all of the stories have been written because I haven't told all 160. I've probably told maybe 30, 35.
I didn't realize there were that many.
Mhm.
Well, tell us how they work. What is a flannel board story?
Well, you have to go back to the dark ages. Because it is a board, so big, covered with flannel, and then there's characters and background, and usually dirt and a road and mountains and then sky, and then you put the pieces on as you tell the story. So, like with the Zacchaeus story, there's a big tree, and you go hide Zacchaeus in the tree, and there's like, I think 6 nativity stories that kind of tell the whole story. The same thing with Holy Week. There's like 6 different stories. There's a whole series that I use those at a mother-daughter banquet, which we used to have back in the dark ages here, of the Naomi and Ruth story. So all the stories that are there are ones that I've had to kind of put together, because it gives you the scripture, but it doesn't give you, as the storyteller, the words to say.
So you have to put that part of the lyrics to the song.
Yeah, you have to kind of figure it out so that it's age appropriate for wee ones versus what's in the scripture.
Well, one of the things I remember about you telling those stories is how rapt attention you receive from the kids.
Yeah, they tend to be right there with me.
And it may be because it's so different from what they usually see.
It's not animated, and it starts out with just a blank board, and then you just start layering, well, from the top, you layer on the pieces, and I always had fun doing them. I did one a month for a lot of years.
And those are still here at the church, but in a bit of disrepair?
Yes, we've had some issues with them, and hopefully over the next 6 weeks or so, I'm gonna get them back. I basically told Kate, when the cabinet gets put together, I will be here for however many days it takes to make sure. Originally, they were stored in my basement when we first got them, and I finally said, I don't want the liability, responsibility of having these. And they were kind of all just in boxes. And the Christian Ed Committee, over the course of probably a month, took every story in the envelope and what background pieces you needed to go with it. And I numbered them all and I made an inventory of them. There was a lot
of work.
But it was fun work. I didn't mind doing that.
A labor of love.
Yes, yeah. So.
Well, after Dale Beck, Steve Warren was the senior pastor here. You remember Steve Warren?
Yeah, and I remember one of the first things I said to him was, we're probably related because my maiden name was Warren.
Oh, it was? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So yeah, we talked about that. And Marla, I don't remember Marla.
Marla Cowers. She was associate pastor
I
with
don't remember her.
Steve Warren. What about Don Bird?
Oh yeah. Don was with me during my loss of Ed and then my cancer journey, as was Stephanie. So, and Stephanie is the age she could be my daughter, and I know both my girls were so appreciative of how Stephanie saw the need for them to have some support when I was so critically ill, because I was not a good patient. I'm going to be the first to say I was not a good patient. Most of it I was out of my mind, so that's why I wasn't a good patient. And somebody needed to be with me the whole time, and so the girls were trying to do it. And Stephanie said, you guys can't do this alone. And Stephanie set up a team of people that came and kept me from being a bad patient.
You're talking about Stephanie Price.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a real support and spiritual mentor, I'm sure, to your kids.
Oh, yeah.
And in some ways to you.
Yeah.
She had a real sense about her that is hard to explain.
Yeah. And actually, back in December, I surprised Stephanie by going to Highlands United Methodist Church Sunday morning to worship, and I was sitting there, and I got there early, of course, and I was sitting there in one of the pews, and she came on. What are you doing here? You know, so it was kind of fun.
Well, it was interesting that she went to start what we call the Land, which was a original ministry, very different, kind of contemporary, in touch with nature, for several years, and then recently had an appointment over at Highlands.
And the Highlands Church was built in 1920, so I mean it is an old, beautiful church.
All right.
So yeah.
Remember Claire McNulty Drews?
Of course. She was a horse person, and I love horse people because I grew up doing that. So always had such a. She would always say something every Sunday that would make you think about it all week. That was one of the things I found, is that, oh yeah, I should probably contemplate that a tad. So.
I really liked her and was really sad when she was ill and not able to continue with us, because I thought she connected with a lot of us.
I totally agree. I totally agree.
And Lynn Jake is the pastor here now.
And I like Lynn. I'm really sad she's leaving. I think she was a good addition for our church. She came in under awful situation with it being COVID lockdown, so I think it's been tough for her.
Yeah, I agree.
So.
Any other pastors or associate pastors that we haven't mentioned that you remember?
Trying to think. And I looked the list over, and that's why I put that in there. No, I can't really think of any other ones.
Well, Barbara, over the years, you've been involved in a lot of different things. You talked about Christian education
I
for
spent
the
a lot of
children,
time on
which is
Christian ed.
the Sunday school,
Yeah.
and sometimes the youth is involved in that same thing.
Yeah, and Bible school and Christmas pageants and, all that stuff.
What's your favorite memory about those things?
I think the favorite Christmas pageant we did umpteen years ago, because my girls were teeny, was based on a children's book I'd found, and we kind of wrote it ourselves. It was about a woman who was visited by all these people who were telling her to go to Bethlehem to see the Christ child. And we worked it at the time. We had enough children that we had leveled Sunday school instead of one lump Sunday school. And each Sunday school class put something together, whether it was a simple song or a little drama. It wasn't like a pageant where everybody, and they actually came. Actually, I had played the babushka was her name, because nobody else would do it. So I played the babushka, and they had to come to me and try to convince me with what it was they were doing to go to Bethlehem to see the Christ child. And every kid who was in Sunday school was a part of that, and it was all different, which was
We've also been involved in a ministry called So Many Blessings.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
Actually, Donna Ralston started this probably nine years ago now. And we make baby clothes originally it was for UMCOR. We would go to Salt Lake City, spend a week over there sewing, and then having taken what we'd made during the process, we turned it into like a mission trip. And let's see, I went 3 years, they went 4 years. I couldn't go the fourth year because I'd just gotten out of the hospital, so I couldn't go that year. But UMCOR is no longer shipping internationally. And so now we are making these baby clothes, or baby layettes we call them, and giving them to Project Cure. And what we did last year, we've been making about 150 layettes a year. And the ones we did last year went to Ukraine. We know that, they let us know.
And what are the pieces that go into a layette?
There are 2 little baby gowns, I call them kimonos, 2 little kimono things. 2 baby blankets, 4 diapers, 2 washcloths, a little fleece hoodie, and it's all in a tote bag for mom.
Things people in America would get at Target or somewhere, but around
Yeah.
the world is not available.
Yeah, well, and 2 different times now when we've taken this stuff to Project Cure, and the person that has received our donation, I guess what you would say, I've shown them what was in these bags. And they were 2 different people, and both of them said these will be the best clothes those children ever wear. So, and for us, it's just fun to do.
That's a great project.
Yeah. We're at, right now, and this is February. We are at 147 layettes right now. Our goal, we keep upping our goal. It was going to be 100, then it was going to be 150, and now we said, okay, by May we can do 175. So there's really only there used to be close to 20 of us, but again, aging and death and moving to different churches has dropped our numbers to about 4. So 4 consistently are sewing.
And do you sew every day or once a week? How do you do that?
Once a month I say once a month, but January we got snowed out. February we got snowed out. Once a month we get together and sew together. And then you sew as you can on your own. Like I sewed all day yesterday just because I had time.
Yeah.
Now this week I won't have time to do that.
Right.
And then once a month we get together and everybody brings their stuff and we show what we've made, and then we tally it so we know how many we have of what, to go where it needs to go.
And then usually once a month or once a quarter, you take it to...
No, we do it once a year. We actually meet from September to May. We kind of follow a school schedule.
Yeah.
And so in May is our packed month. We don't sew that month. We layettes together and boxing them. and labeling them so that Project Cure knows there are 8 layets in this box, or there are 6, because I tend to use whatever boxes I can acquire during the course of the year. So some will hold 6, some will hold 8, some will hold 12. So we kind of label the boxes so that they know how many is in each one.
I think it's a wonderful ministry.
It's very quiet. If you know anyone who wants to sew, we'd love to have. And I always say you don't have to know how to use a needle and thread to help us, because if you can use scissors, we can use you.
That's wonderful.
So,
Can you tell me about your thoughts on the current split between the progressives and maybe the traditionalists in the Methodist Church?
I think it's sad, because I think Jesus would be very sad to see it happening. I am glad we're choosing to stay with the United Methodist rather than, oh, we can't have, I can remember when this all started. I was in Oklahoma, which is a tad more conservative than
Yes.
this area. And the Sunday that we were in church with Bob's family, and the pastor was preaching on this. Oh, this, we just can't have homosexual pastors. And we went to dinner with the family afterwards. And one of the cousins said to me, "How do you feel about that? How does your church feel about it?" And my response simply was, "Currently, our bishop is a lesbian. And you know what? She does her job just." That kind of was the end of that discussion.
I can imagine.
So,
Oh.
yeah. And also, one of our associate pastors here.
Yeah.
So I don't understand it. Because I say it's not for me to judge. There'll be a point where God judges. And I'm not the judge.
Thank you.
And if you're a good person, whatever you choose to do is okay.
Finding somebody to love you is difficult enough in today's world.
Exactly.
Without adding all that other stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's how I feel about that.
Well, Barb, you've been a member here for 40 years
Yeah,
now.
I know.
What would you like to see Hope do in the next 40 years?
I think we need to grow. I look around the pews on Sunday morning and everybody has the same colored hair as me. And the only way the church is going to continue is to find those young people to come back. And it saddens me that my girls who were raised in the church are not really active in the church. That doesn't mean they're not good people, but they don't feel that need. And I really am concerned, especially since the Queen Anne's Garden is here. This building has to stay, because we have people residing here in perpetuity.
Yes.
One of which is my late husband, and which hopefully many, 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 many years from now will be me as well. But if the church isn't here, what's going to happen to that? That's what is concerning to me.
Sure.
So.
Well, we talked about some of your experiences and some of your service here. Are there other members or people that you remember particularly?
Well, there are good people here that would do just about anything to help someone out, and I know that. You want me to? I'm going to finish this with something I wrote back when Don Bird was pastoring here, and he was doing a sermon series on what is hope, meaning what is Hope Church. And it was right after I had been through a pretty intense battle with cancer, where cancer thought it was going to win, but it didn't. And they had asked me to talk about that, and I said, I can't just talk about that, because there's more to my journey with hope and the support that I found through hope than my cancer journey. So I wrote this, and this is how I'm just going to end this. While I'm not a founding member of Hope, my family has been through times of challenge and times of joy. in the midst of a caring congregation. In January of 1983, Chuck and I joined this congregation, me very pregnant. We raised our two girls who were baptized, confirmed in this church, surrounded by the love and support of many amazing people, while being involved in children, youth, and family activities. In April 1999, Chuck died very suddenly. Within hours of our church family finding out about this, our devastated home was filled with many loving, caring church friends. With both Chuck and I having grown up in very small towns, I remember Chuck's parents being so thankful for the small town response of Hope in supporting us through some very difficult months. Every time we needed someone, there they were. When a second chance evolved for me to marry my sweet Ed, I started a new marriage in January of 2006, once again here at Hope, surrounded with the love and support of so many people. When January of 2014 found me once again losing a husband, this time to cancer, so many church friends stepped forward to hold me and my girls up through more trying times. Then came November of 2015 and a cancer diagnosis for me, out of the blue. Once again, we felt an overwhelming outpouring of love and support from this amazing congregation. Now by myself, my girls requested rides and food for Mom. The sign-up sheet was instantly filled. God was constantly hearing prayers on my behalf. In January of 2016, when I was hospitalized in the ICU, a Brigade of Hope family trekked to the hospital in blizzards to stay with me round the clock and spell my daughters. With the love and support of this congregation and the goodness of God, I fought and won that battle. What will my future bring? I really don't know. But I'm not afraid, because I rest assured that regardless of the obstacles or celebrations I face, God and the people of this church will be there for me, and I will be there for them.